The runway shook like a living thing. Engines roared. Heat shimmered. The night smelled like jet fuel and hot metal. A yellow moon hung low over the hangars, bruised by drifting clouds. Somewhere a wrench clinked against concrete. A laugh snapped and vanished. Boots scuffed. Radios hissed. Then silence again, the kind that presses on your ears. She moved through it all like still water. No name stitched on her chest. No chatter. Just crisp sleeves rolled once. Gloves tight. Hair braided back, caught by a black band that never seemed to move even when the wind bullied it. She was small if you measured by height, but something about her presence made the bigger mechanics step aside without realizing they had. They called her the quiet one, when they had to call her anything at all. She didn't look at people. She looked at the Warthog. Its gray skin glowed under floodlights, a beast at rest. The rivets, the panels, the snout like cannon. She ran her fingertips near the seams, not touching, never touching without a reason, like she was reading Braille only she understood. The A-10 waited, shoulders hunched, a bruiser ready to take a punch and throw 10 back. Her cart rattled as she pushed it into the wash of light. Missiles cradled in metal frames. Lift straps. Pins laid out like a surgeon's tools. Checklists clipped to a board, the corners soft from use. She never hurried. Hurrying is how you forget a step. Forgetting a step is how people die. Need a hand, ma'am? A crewman asked, half hopeful. She shook her head. One small shake. He backed away, as if that was the loudest no he'd ever heard. The pilot climbed down from the ladder, helmet under his arm. He had that easy grin some pilots wear like a patch, a grin that says, "I've been in the sky," and came back on purpose. Sweat glistened along his hairline. He looked young until he didn't, until the light hit the creases at the corner of his eyes. "You the loader?" he asked, voice light. She nodded once. Eyes on the pylon. He waited, then tried again. "You ever get used to the noise?" She didn't answer. Instead, she tipped her head toward the engine nacelle and listened, really listened, to the rumble. It wasn't just noise to her. It was the sound of a heartbeat that might falter if you didn't respect it. She raised a hand and he felt quiet, as if she'd tuned him down with a dial. Clip. Strap. Tension. Release. Her movements had a rhythm that pulled the eye. The missile lifted, swung, eased home under the wing with a kiss like metal to metal, saying hello again. "Clear," she said, the only word she'd offer, and the crewman at the far side answered with a thumbs up like an exclamation point. Wind combed the tarmac. Somewhere a dog barked. The floodlights buzzed. You would have watched her too. I know you would have. You would have felt something you couldn't name, the way you feel when a song gets the exact temperature of your memory right. Who was she? Why the silence? What story was she keeping contained, neat as a checkmark? Another missile. Another lift. Sweat gathered in her collar. She adjusted her gloves with a small tug that made the leather creak. The pilot edged closer, compelled by some mix of curiosity and boredom, and the sense that something important was happening in a quiet way right in front of him. "Looks solid," he said, peering along the rail. "You've got steady hands." Her eyes flicked to his. Dark eyes. Unreadable. Then back to the task. "Ever fly?" he asked. She tightened coupling. "I load," she said. He laughed, but softly, so it wouldn't break the air. Fair enough. For a breath, everything stilled. A hot, dry breath the desert takes before it decides to spit sand across the runway. Even the insects seemed to hold their wings. In that pause, you could hear heartbeats if you listened hard enough. Hers. His. Maybe yours, too. She reached for the last missile. This is where the story slows. You feel it, right? The way a moment gets heavy because something is leaning its weight on it. She aligned the cradle, checked the angle with her eyes, not the gauge. People trusted gauges until the day a gauge lied. She trusted muscle memory, the kind you build by repeating truth until your body can recite it without your mind's permission. "Watch your fingers," the crewman warned, unnecessary. She slid the strap around the fuselage. The strap whispered through the buckle. The missile rose, obedient, as she pumped the lever. Up, up. Almost there. The pilot shifted closer, hand on the ladder, chin lifted for the best view. His grin had softened into interest, into respect. You could see the moment he realized he was watching a craft, not a job. He opened his mouth, maybe to say that, to give the compliment clean and simple. Then it happened. Her sleeve slipped to her elbow, then higher as she reached. Black ink glinted. He stared. It was quick. A blink. A jolt. You know how a single detail can snip through your composure like a scissor through thread? That. She didn't notice. She seated the missile, pinned it, tug-tested it like she was trying to pull the entire plane off the ground with her two arms. The strap sang as it came free. Metal settled with a satisfied sigh. She checked the rail. She checked her board. She checked the sky. The pilot didn't move. Not a word. Not a breath. His eyes were pinned to that ink. In the harsh wash of the floodlight, the tattoo looked like a bruise carved into a shape. Not a flower. Not a skull. Not a careless doodle. It was a mark with edges that meant something. A symbol you don't carry lightly. A memory burned into skin because paper can be lost and voices can be silenced. He swallowed. His tongue touched a mouth gone suddenly dry. The ladder squeaked under his grip. The squeak was too loud. The kind of small sound that makes everyone notice even if they don't look up. The crewman glanced over, brows pinched. The pilot didn't see. He was somewhere else, pulled backward through one doorway of recognition after another. Her forearm flexed as she locked the last safety pin. The tattoo shifted. The edges sharpened. The image, there it was, clear as if it had been printed for him. A symbol, a number under it, a date maybe, a place, a call sign, a pair of tiny wings, a line that could be a river, or a runway, or a grave. He breathed out the way people do when a nightmare warps into a memory, then into a fact. "Hey, you okay?" the crewman asked him. Not her. Him. No answer. She set her clipboard on the cart, wrote something small with a pencil worn to the size of a cigarette, folded the board shut, tapped it once. A ritual. The wind tugged a stranded hair loose. She didn't fix it. Her eyes found the Warthog's nose again. Something softened in her face, the way faces do when they look at the only thing that understands them. The pilot finally remembered to breathe. It sounded like a first breath after diving too deep. He stepped down one rung, then stopped. His boot froze in midair. He looked at her like you look at a ghost who knows your name. "What?" he started, then bit the word in half. Words feel fragile in moments like that, as if saying them wrong might shatter the world's thin skin. She turned, slow, like she had all the time in the world. The ink on her arm was impossible to unsee now. The lines, the angles, the grief tucked into geometry. Their eyes met. Wind, floodlight, far-off thunder from another jet taking off. The earth humming to itself. "Clear," she said again, soft, a closing note. Then she lifted the clipboard, as if to offer it. He didn't take it. His knuckles had gone white on the ladder. The grin was gone. The pilot mask, too. What was left looked older, raw, like a face scraped clean. You could see a story rising in him, so fast it made his pulse hit his throat. She tilted her head, not quite a question. More like a permission. Have you ever seen someone freeze because the past walked out of the dark and tapped their shoulder? Did you feel that weight? That twist in the gut? That sense that the world had been pretending to be normal and finally got tired of pretending? The crewman called out a routine time check. The sound skittered across the concrete and died. The pilot let his boot find the rung again. He didn't climb. Not yet. He looked at the tattoo like it might speak if he stared long enough. "What's that mean?" he asked, voice low like a prayer. She glanced at the ink. Just a glance. Like it belonged to another lifetime. Like it hurt and didn't. Like she'd made peace with a war that refused to sign the papers. The corner of her mouth lifted. Not a smile. More like the shape a smile would make if it had been taught to be careful. "Load's complete," she said, and turned back to the jet. The pilot didn't move. The night tightened its grip. And then he saw it fully. The symbol. The number beneath. He knew it. He knew exactly where and when and who. His hand slipped. The ladder jerked. His breath stopped in his chest. He froze. What would you do if a stranger's tattoo dragged you back to the one thing you swore you'd never face again? Would you ask the question, or step into the sky and hope the answers wait up there? The ladder rattled under his boots. The world around him was alive with noise. Engines groaning, radios crackling, wind rushing past the open hangar doors. But all of it felt muted, muffled, like he was standing underwater, staring at that single piece of ink burned into her skin. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a memory. His chest tightened as his brain scrambled to process what his eyes were seeing. The simple black lines, clean and sharp, formed a symbol he knew too well. It was etched into his memory from a night he had buried deep, a night he swore he'd never revisit. The symbol belonged to a squadron, but not just any squadron. His squadron. And beneath it, those numbers. The date. His breath caught. He remembered that exact day. The day that changed everything. "Hey, you all right, sir?" one of the crewmen called, but the words barely registered. The pilot gripped the ladder harder, knuckles pale. He couldn't answer. He couldn't look away from her. She didn't even notice him staring, didn't sense the storm she just triggered inside his chest. She was calmly finishing up, wiping her hands with a rag like this was any other late-night loadout, like she hadn't just dragged him back to the single most haunting night of his life. She bent to check the locking pin, and that movement gave him another glimpse of the ink. He swallowed hard. It wasn't just a squadron symbol. There was a winged dagger in the center, a small star above it, and below, a pair of initials etched in thin script. He knew those initials. His stomach turned over. The sound of jet engines roared through his ears, but in his mind, he wasn't here on the tarmac anymore. He was back there, back in the desert, under a different moon, standing over burning sand and twisted wreckage. The screams, the smell of fuel, the distant thud of explosions echoing like a heartbeat. He'd made a promise that night, a promise he'd never fulfilled. And here, standing before him, was a quiet stranger carrying that night on her skin. She stood up, tossing the rag back into her cart. Her movements were precise, practiced. The kind of precise you only get when you've done something so many times it becomes second nature. She still hadn't looked at him. Didn't seem to care he was staring. He forced himself to speak, his voice rougher than he meant. "Where'd you get that tattoo?" That got her attention. Slowly, she turned her head, her expression unreadable. The floodlights hid her face, casting half of it in shadow. She didn't answer right away. "You're not cleared to ask," she finally said, her voice calm, soft, but carrying something sharp underneath. The words weren't rude. They weren't defensive. But they told him everything. This was not a conversation she wanted to have. "Sorry," he muttered, though he wasn't sorry at all. He needed answers. She went back to her checklist, scribbling something in neat, tight handwriting. The pencil scratched faintly on the board. He felt his heart pounding in his chest. Why would she have that symbol? Those initials? That date? She couldn't have been there. She looked too young. Maybe she wasn't even in the service back then. Maybe. Unless. Was it him? He asked before he could stop himself. His voice cracked on the last word. Her hand froze mid-scribble. She didn't turn to look at him, but he saw the faintest tremor in her shoulders. That was all the answer he needed. The hangar lights flickered as another jet powered up in the distance, and for a second, he saw her differently. Not just as a loader, not as some quiet crew member blending into the background. No, she was a living reminder of something he tried to bury. He stepped off the ladder, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. The concrete was slick with a fine sheen of oil, reflecting streaks of yellow light. The air was heavy with exhaust, but he could still smell it, that faint scent of burning sand and blood from that night. He walked closer, his shadow stretching long under the lights. She noticed. "Why do you have it?" he asked. His voice was firm this time, though his throat felt tight. She glanced at him briefly, eyes dark and unreadable, then returned her attention to the Warthog's wing. "It's personal," she said simply. "That's not just a tattoo," he pressed. "That's a memorial." She didn't answer, but the way her fingers tightened around the clipboard confirmed it. "Who was he to you?" His voice softened now. as if he was afraid of scaring her off, afraid she'd walk away, and he'd never get the truth. She finally looked at him fully, and for the first time, he saw the flicker of something raw in her eyes. Pain, anger, maybe both. "You already know," she said quietly. His breath caught. She was right. He did know. The world spun for a second, memory crashing over him like waves. He saw the desert night, the black sky torn open by tracer fire, the screams on the radio, the call sign of the man he couldn't save. He blinked, and he was back here, under harsh floodlights, and a sky that smelled like rain instead of dust. She was still staring at him, calm but unflinching. "You were there, weren't you?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't accusing. It wasn't angry. It was steady. Too steady. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. Her eyes softened for the briefest second, like she was studying him, measuring him. Then she turned back to her work, sliding a wrench into her belt. "You should get some rest before the briefing," she said, her tone now cool, professional. It stung. Not because she was cold, but because it was clear she wasn't ready to tell him more. He watched her walk away, her boots making sharp clicks on the concrete. The tattoo flashed under the lights once more before she disappeared into the shadows near the hangar doors. He stood there frozen, heart pounding, mind racing. That tattoo wasn't random. It wasn't just ink. It was a warning, a story, a ghost screaming at him through silence. And he knew, deep down, that she wasn't done with him yet. Because no one carries a mark like that without a reason. The tarmac was empty now. Engines that once roared like thunder were silent, and the hangars stood like hulking shadows under the pale wash of moonlight. The smell of jet fuel still clung to the air, faint but sharp, mingling with the scent of rain carried by the wind. Somewhere, a loose piece of sheet metal clanged softly, echoing across the base. The kind of sound that makes you look over your shoulder even when you know you're alone. He wasn't supposed to be here. Pilots were meant to sleep, to rest their bodies and sharpen their minds before dawn briefings. But his head was a hurricane, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ink. That tattoo, those initials, that date. So instead of sleeping, he found himself wandering back to the hangar. She was there, of course. He shouldn't have been surprised. She stood by the Warthog like a shadow tethered to the beast, checking something on a panel by flashlight. Her gloves were off now, tucked in her back pocket, and her hands, scarred, strong, moved over the metal skin of the jet with the tenderness of a mechanic touching a wounded animal. The dim beam of the flashlight caught her face, carving her expression into sharp lines. Focused, calm, but not cold. Not tonight. "Don't pilots get curfew?" she said without looking at him, her voice carrying easily in the stillness. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. His own voice sounded too loud, so he lowered it. "You." She shut the panel and finally turned toward him. "Somebody has to make sure this thing doesn't fall apart in the air." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's reassuring." She tilted her head, not quite a smile, but something close. "It'll hold," she said simply, resting a hand on the Warthog's side. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like a pause before thunder. The wind slipped through the hangar, tugging at her braid. He saw the tattoo again, faintly visible where her sleeve had ridden up. The sight made his chest tighten. He stepped closer, boots scraping softly against concrete. "That tattoo," he said quietly. She didn't look surprised. "You're still thinking about it." Hard not to. Her eyes finally met his. In the dark, they gleamed like glass, reflective, unreadable. "It's not just a tattoo," he said. "No," she agreed softly. The single word sent a shiver down his spine. He took a breath, his throat tight. "I know that symbol. I know the date. I was there." Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders straightened slightly, a subtle shift only someone watching closely would notice. "I figured," she said. He frowned. "You figured." She leaned against the jet, crossing her arms. The flashlight beam swung lazily against the concrete floor, lighting up oil stains and boot prints. "You froze when you saw it," she said softly. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost." "That told me enough." "I did see a ghost," he whispered. His. That made her pause. Her lips parted just slightly, her eyes flickering with something fragile. Pain. He stepped closer, carefully, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. Who was he to you? Her jaw tightened. Someone I owed my life to. There was a beat of silence. Then she turned her head, her gaze far away. He saved me, she said, her voice quieter now, but steady. When no one else could. He pulled me out of fire I never thought I'd escape. And he paid for it with his life. The words landed like stones in his chest. He knew exactly who she was talking about. He'd been there that night, but he hadn't been able to save him. He'd been too late. Her hand drifted to the tattoo, almost unconsciously, fingers brushing it gently. I got this after, so I wouldn't forget. As if I ever could. He swallowed hard. You didn't have to be there to remember. I was there, she said flatly, cutting him off. That stunned him into silence. I was just a kid, she continued, her voice low. 17. Fresh out of training. Didn't even know which way was up. They threw me into that mission because they were short on hands. Said it was supposed to be simple. She gave a small, bitter laugh. It wasn't. His heart sank. He could see it now, her younger, terrified self crouched in the back of a transport, gunfire raining down, the sound of chaos filling her ears. She turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable again. You were the one in the Warthog that night, weren't you? He froze. How do you know that? She studied him. The radio chatter. Your voice. His breath caught. She had been there. She'd heard him. That night wasn't just his nightmare, it was hers, too. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling shakily. I didn't get there in time. No one could have, she said softly. But that didn't make it easier to hear. Her voice softened even further, almost a whisper. He told me to run. Said the sky was bringing me home. Said you'd cover me. His chest constricted. He remembered that transmission. He'd replayed it over and over in his head for years, memorizing the sound of his friend's voice telling him to take care of the kid. He never knew the kid was her. I owed him, she said, her eyes glistening now, but steady. So I stayed. I learned every inch of these planes. I learned how to keep them in the sky. Because if one more pilot gets left behind, she trailed off, her voice catching for the first time. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with shared grief. Two ghosts standing under the same roof, breathing the same heavy air. You fly tomorrow, she said finally, wiping at her face quickly, like she hadn't meant for him to see the tear. And it's not just a mission. His head snapped up. What do you mean? She met his gaze, her voice suddenly steel. They're not telling you everything. About what's out there. About who's waiting. His heart pounded. How do you know that? She tilted her head toward her tattoo. Because the same people who took him, they're the ones you're flying toward. The words hit him like a punch. She pushed away from the jet, stepping closer now. He could smell faint traces of jet fuel and soap on her uniform. Whatever they told you, double it, she said. And don't trust anyone who tells you this is routine. It isn't. Not for them. Not for you. His jaw tightened. Then why are you here? She held his gaze. Because I won't let history repeat itself. A gust of wind swept through the hangar, rattling chains and scattering papers on a nearby workbench. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly, then went silent. She picked up her flashlight and walked toward the exit. You should sleep, she said without turning around. Wait, he called. She stopped but didn't face him. What's your name? He asked softly. A pause. Then, names don't matter out here. Only what you stand for. And with that, she disappeared into the shadows, leaving him standing alone beneath the hulking Warthog, her warning echoing in his ears. The sky was black as ink. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the horizon held that faint, bruised glow, like the world was just beginning to stir. The airfield buzzed with quiet urgency. Pilots moved like shadows, helmets tucked under their arms, heads bent toward last-minute briefings. Engines coughed and roared awake, their vibrations thrumming through the concrete. He sat in the cockpit of his Warthog, strapping in, every movement mechanical. He should have been focused, calm, but her words from last night kept echoing. They're not telling you everything. Not about what's out there. Not about who's waiting. He glanced toward the hangar doors, half expecting to see her standing there. But she wasn't. She'd vanished into the night hours ago, leaving only that warning, and the ghost of her stare behind. Raven 1, status check. The radio crackled. He flicked switches, fingers steady even while his heart wasn't. Raven 1, green and good to go. Copy that. Wheels up in 2. He lowered his visor, sealing himself into a world of glass, metal, and humming machinery. The scent of fuel and hydraulic fluid filled the cockpit. He gripped the throttle, breathing deep, letting muscle memory take over. But something gnawed at him. That tattoo. Those initials. The way her voice had gone cold when she'd said, "The same people who took him." The runway blurred beneath him as the A-10 thundered forward. The roar of the engines vibrated through his bones, a low, primal growl. He felt that familiar lurch in his gut as the wheels left the ground, the plane lifting into darkness. He climbed fast, banking toward the coordinates. Below, the base shrank to pinpricks of yellow light. The world became shadow and sky. Mission brief said it was routine, a scouting run over hostile terrain, a simple patrol. He was to fly in low, make a pass, and report back. Easy. But the knot in his stomach told him otherwise. As he flew, the ground below shifted from flat desert to jagged ridges. The faint glow of dawn painted everything in silver blue. He scanned the terrain through his HUD, eyes flicking across valleys and ravines. At first, everything seemed normal. Quiet. Too quiet. Then, the radio hissed. Raven 1, you're approaching target sector. Report status. Copy, he replied, his voice even. He scanned again. And that's when he saw it. Movement. At first, it was just a flicker, something shifting in the shadows of a canyon. He adjusted altitude, zooming in with his targeting pod. Not just movement. Multiple heat signatures. Control, I've got something, he said carefully. Define something, Raven 1, came the bored voice from command. Not in the brief, he muttered. That's what I'm defining. More shapes moved in the canyon. Trucks. Weapons. The kind of setup you don't assemble overnight. He felt his pulse spike. Her voice whispered in his head. They're waiting for you. Suddenly, his radar pinged. Once. Twice. Then it screamed. A lock-on warning blaring through his headset. Missile lock, he barked, jerking the stick hard. A streak of light shot up from the canyon like a spear. He pulled into a sharp bank, the G-forces crushing him into the seat. The missile streaked past, close enough that the heat rattled his frame. Raven 1 evasive. No kidding. Another ping. Another missile. The quiet, routine patrol had turned into a trap. He dove lower, hugging the canyon walls, the sound of rushing wind screaming in his ears. Tracer fire arced up toward him, red streaks cutting the dim dawn sky. He yanked the throttle, his vision tunneling from the force of the turn. The Warthog roared like an angry beast. He flipped open the master arm switch, his fingers flying over controls. Fox 3, he muttered, releasing a missile of his own. The jet jolted as the weapon streaked down, slamming into a truck convoy below. A fireball blossomed, heat licking at the underside of his plane. Smoke curled upward, staining the sky. His breathing was ragged now, but his hands were steady. Training took over. Another missile lock. Another warning tone screaming in his headset. Not today, he growled, pulling into a climb. The plane's engines howled, straining as he pitched upward, breaking the lock just as another missile shot past. He circled back, anger replacing fear. He wasn't just flying now. He was hunting. Guns hot, he muttered. The Warthog's cannon spun up with a chilling whine. BRRRT. The sound tore through the morning air as shells rained down on the canyon. Trucks exploded. Fighters scattered. The ground lit up with flashes of fire. Raven 1, report. Command's voice was sharp now, all boredom gone. Contact confirmed. Multiple hostiles. Ambush set. Not routine, he snapped, his voice tight. You sent me into a kill zone. Static. Then, Raven 1 disengage. No time, he cut in. He banked again, tracing a second run. The targeting pod highlighted a cluster of vehicles and a heavy artillery emplacement. He squeezed the trigger. The Warthog roared, unleashing another hailstorm. Metal shredded. Flames erupted. The canyon floor was chaos. But he wasn't done. Not yet. A flash of memory struck him mid-turn. Her voice, soft and steady. He saved me. And I couldn't save him. This was the same group. The same insignias on the trucks. The same weapons setup. They'd done it before. Taken lives. Stolen peace. Not today. He dove low, almost skimming the canyon floor. The Warthog spat fire. Bullets tore into the enemy camp, ripping through tents, crates, vehicles. He felt the heat of his own weapons wash back into the cockpit, smelled the acrid scent of smoke even from thousands of feet up. She was there, standing by the hangar, arms crossed, braid whipping in the morning wind. She wasn't smiling, wasn't relieved. She was just watching. He climbed out of the cockpit, helmet under his arm, sweat dripping down his back. Their eyes met across the runway. No words, no salute, just a nod from her. A nod that said, "I told you." And beneath it, something else. Something heavier. Because now he knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The airfield was hushed when the chaos ended. Smoke lingered on the horizon, a faint smear of gray against the bruised morning sky. The Warthog sat cooling on the tarmac, its engines ticking softly, metal hissing as it shed the heat of battle. The smell of gunpowder and burning fuel still clung to his flight suit. Every muscle in his body ached from the G-forces, but his mind wouldn't rest. She was waiting for him. He spotted her near the edge of the hangar, standing perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back. The wind teased loose strands of her braid, but her face remained calm, carved from something stronger than steel. She didn't move as he climbed down from the ladder, but her eyes followed him, dark and steady. Their gazes met, and for a second, neither spoke. "You knew," he finally said, his voice low, raw. She didn't flinch. "I told you." He dropped his helmet on the tarmac, running a hand through sweat-soaked hair. "It wasn't a patrol. It was an execution. They had me dead to rights." "And yet," she gestured toward him, her voice calm but edged with something almost like relief, "you're here." He let out a sharp breath that was half a laugh, half disbelief. "Because of you." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, heavy but not empty. The sound of distant activity filtered in, a mechanic shouting orders, the clang of tools, the low growl of another jet taxiing. But here, in this patch of shade by the hangar, it felt like the world had slowed. He finally spoke again, voice softer. "Why didn't you tell me everything last night?" She turned away, looking out at the fading smoke. Her jaw tightened. "Because talking doesn't bring people back." That hit him harder than he expected. "You were there that night," he said, stepping closer. "I know you were. I heard you on the radio. You were the one he was protecting." Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't look at him. "He called you little bird." That got her. She blinked, her composure cracking just slightly. She finally turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw the truth in her eyes, not just pain, but guilt. "I was just a kid," she admitted, her voice quiet. 17. Still figuring out which end of the rifle to hold. "He was my mentor, my friend. He saved me more times than I deserved." She tugged at her sleeve, pulling it back to reveal the tattoo fully. Up close, the ink looked even more haunting. The winged dagger, the star, the date etched beneath. "I watched him fall," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "And I couldn't do a thing. I hid in the wreckage while he bled out on the sand. The last thing he said was your call sign." His breath caught. He felt his knees weaken as the weight of her words settled on him. He said my name?" She nodded once, tears glinting in her eyes but refusing to fall. "Said you'd finish the fight, that you'd bring me home." The pilot took a shaky breath, stepping closer until they were only a foot apart. "I tried," he said, his voice breaking. "God, I tried. But I was too late." He stopped, the guilt clawing at his throat. She shook her head firmly. You were there. That's all that mattered. You brought me back alive. That's why I'm here. That's why I stayed in the service. Every missile I load, every aircraft I keep in the air, it's for him. Because I couldn't save him, but I can save someone else. Her hand brushed the tattoo. This isn't just for him. It's a reminder to me. Every day. He swallowed hard, his chest aching. He'd spent years haunted by that mission, by the faces he couldn't save. And here she was, proof that his efforts hadn't been in vain. Proof that his friend's sacrifice had meant something. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly he said, "You saved me today." Her lips curved into something faintly resembling a smile. I owed him. And I owed you. The emotion in her voice cracked something inside him. He wanted to say more, to tell her that she'd done enough, that she didn't have to keep punishing herself. But before he could, she spoke again. "They'll come for you again," she said, her voice steady now. This wasn't the end. Just a warning shot. They know your face. They know your plane. His jaw tightened. Then let them come. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing his resolve. Then she nodded once, satisfied. "You remind me of him," she said softly. He blinked. "Him who?" She gave him a small, sad smile. "The man this tattoo is for. Stubborn. Brave. Always ready to protect everyone but himself." That hit him harder than he expected. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke and jet fuel. The sun was rising now, painting the runway gold. The war wasn't over, not for him, not for her. But in that moment, they shared a rare, quiet peace. She turned to leave, her boots crunching on gravel. He watched her go, the tattoo visible on her arm like a banner of memory and defiance. Before she disappeared into the hangar's shadows, she paused and glanced back. "Fly safe," she said softly. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. And then she was gone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the horizon. The weight of the night's battle settled on him. But so did something else, a strange calm. Because now he understood. That tattoo wasn't just a memorial. It was a promise. And whether he liked it or not, he was part of that promise now.